Picture the first light of dawn breaking over ancient Japan. A lone figure stands motionless in a quiet courtyard, his silhouette sharp against the softening sky. This samurai isn't preparing for battle, not yet. Instead, he's beginning another day of relentless, disciplined training that would push even the most dedicated modern athlete to their absolute limits. Have you ever wondered what it truly took to become one of history's most legendary warriors? We often romanticize the samurai, picturing them in fierce combat or clad in magnificent armor. But we rarely pause to consider the grueling, day-in and day-out rituals that forged these icons of discipline and strength. Their lives weren't just about moments of glory. They were built on a foundation of daily effort so intense, so consuming, that it shaped not only their bodies but their very souls. Think about your own routine. Maybe you hit the gym a few times a week, go for a run, or try to stick to a healthy diet. Now imagine waking before the sun every single day, regardless of weather or fatigue, to train for hours on end. No distractions, no excuses, just unwavering commitment to mastering the sword, the bow, the art of strategy, and the cultivation of unbreakable focus. The samurai didn't have the luxury of rest days or half-hearted efforts. Their survival, their honor, and their purpose depended on a level of daily conditioning that seems almost superhuman by today's standards. And yet, there's something deeply compelling about their journey, something that speaks to our own desire for discipline, meaning, and excellence. In this video, we're going to step into their world. We'll uncover the mysteries behind their legendary training regimens, from pre-dawn meditation and brutal physical exercises to the intricate martial drills that honed their reflexes to near perfection. We'll explore how their daily practices blended mental, physical, and spiritual conditioning into one seamless pursuit of mastery. And along the way, you might just discover parallels to the goals we set for ourselves today, whether it's building resilience, cultivating focus, or striving to be better than we were yesterday. This isn't just a history lesson. It's an invitation to understand what true discipline looks like, and perhaps to find inspiration in the relentless daily grind of the samurai. Before a samurai ever lifted a sword or drew a bow, their most critical training began within the confines of their own mind. The physical prowess we so often associate with these warriors was merely the outward expression of a far deeper, more rigorous internal discipline, all governed by an unshakable ethical framework known as Bushido, or the way of the warrior. This wasn't a casual set of suggestions. It was a strict code that dictated every action, every thought, and every moment of a samurai's life, from the most dramatic battle to the most mundane daily interaction. To understand their training is to first understand this spiritual and moral compass that made their incredible physical feats possible. At the heart of Bushido lay 7 core virtues, each acting as a pillar for their existence. Righteousness, or gi, was the bedrock, the unwavering commitment to doing what is just and moral, even when it was difficult or personally disadvantageous. Courage, yu, was not the absence of fear but the mastery of it, the ability to act correctly and decisively in the face of grave danger. Honor, meio, was everything. A samurai's reputation was their most valued possession, carefully guarded through impeccable conduct. These principles were intertwined with others like respect, honesty, loyalty, and self-control, creating a comprehensive guide for living a life of purpose and integrity. But how does one actually practice something as abstract as honor or courage? For the samurai, this mental conditioning was as structured as any sword drill. Their day would often begin not with movement, but with absolute stillness. Seated in zazen meditation, a samurai sought to clear the mind of clutter, fear, anger, pride, distraction. This daily practice was essential for cultivating the clarity, and calm needed to make split-second life or death decisions later on. It was in this silence that they fortified their spirit, preparing it to remain unshaken amidst the chaos of combat. Beyond meditation, there was deliberate reflection. Many samurai kept journals, not just logging events, but meticulously examining their own actions and thoughts against the strict standards of Bushido. They would ask themselves difficult questions. Did I act with righteousness today? Was there a moment where fear overruled my duty? This practice of self-scrutiny was a relentless pursuit of moral perfection. They also engaged in deep study, poring over philosophical texts and poetry, and participating in structured dialogues with their mentors to debate ethical dilemmas. This ensured their understanding of the code was not just memorized, but deeply internalized, becoming an instinctual part of their character. The ultimate goal was for a samurai's every action, on and off the battlefield, to be a natural expression of these virtues, making the code itself their most powerful and constant training partner. Before the physical exertion even began, the samurai's day was dedicated to aligning their spirit with the rigid demands of their code. This spiritual preparation was a non-negotiable foundation, a series of deliberate rituals performed with the same intensity as any combat drill. It all started in the profound silence of pre-dawn, a time believed to be when the mind was most receptive and the world most still. The first act was often misogi, a purification ritual. This could involve standing beneath a frigid waterfall or simply bathing with cold water. A practice meant to cleanse the body and symbolically wash away the impurities of the spirit, lingering fears, doubts, and distractions. This shocking, bracing experience was a powerful reminder of self-discipline and the ability to endure discomfort without complaint. Following purification, the warrior would move to a designated space for meditation, typically the practice of zazen, or seated zen. This was far from a passive activity. It was an active training ground for the mind. Sitting in absolute stillness, the samurai focused on their breath, striving to achieve a state of mushin, or no mind. The goal wasn't to empty the mind completely, but to quiet the internal noise of ego, anxiety, and desire, creating a mirror-like clarity. In this state, they could perceive threats and opportunities without the delay of emotional reaction, a skill that was literally life-saving on the battlefield. This daily mental calibration was considered essential for developing the impeccable judgment and calm focus required of a leader and a protector. The next step was often a visit to the family's personal shrine, the Butsuden. Here, the samurai would pay respects to their ancestors, acknowledging the legacy they were a part of and the honor they were duty-bound to uphold. This act of reverence connected them to their past and reinforced their identity and responsibilities within the clan's long history. It was a humbling reminder that their life was part of something much larger than themselves. Finally, many warriors would engage in study, reciting and contemplating passages from foundational texts like the Hagakure or the Book of Five Rings. These weren't merely read, they were internalized. A samurai might reflect on a passage like, "The way of the samurai is found in death," not as a morbid obsession, but as a meditation on embracing mortality to fully commit to living with absolute purpose and without fear. This entire sequence, purification, meditation, reverence, and study, was a comprehensive system designed to forge a spirit as sharp and resilient as the finest katana, ensuring the warrior was mentally and ethically prepared for whatever the day might bring. With their spirit sharpened and their mind clear, the warrior would then turn to the tool that defined their very existence, the katana. More than just a weapon, the katana was considered the soul of the samurai, an extension of their will and a sacred object that demanded both reverence and relentless mastery. Their daily engagement with the sword was an intricate dance of discipline, starting not with dramatic duels, but with the most fundamental and repetitive movements imaginable. The foundation of all sword skill was saburi, the practice of basic cuts. For hours each day, a samurai would perform thousands of these strikes, slicing through empty air. This wasn't about building brute strength. It was about forging perfect, unconscious form. Every single cut was a meditation on geometry and physics. The exact angle of the blade's descent, the precise rotation of the wrists, the seamless transfer of power from the feet through the hips and into the tip of the sword. They practiced the major angles of attack, vertical, diagonal, and horizontal, until the body could execute them flawlessly without a single conscious thought. This relentless repetition was the only path to developing the muscle memory needed for combat, where a fraction of an inch or a microsecond of delay could mean the difference between life and death. After mastering the basic cuts in isolation, the warrior would move on to kata, pre-arranged forms that simulated combat against an imaginary opponent. Each kata was a complex sequence of attacks, blocks, and evasions, telling a story of a specific combat scenario. Practicing these forms for hours on end served multiple critical purposes. It conditioned the body to flow smoothly between different stances and techniques. It ingrained strategic responses to various attacks, and it cultivated an acute awareness of distance and timing, known as moi. The goal was to make every parry and counterattack so instinctual that in the heat of battle, the body would react correctly before the mind even had time to process the threat. This daily drilling in kata was a conversation with an invisible partner, a constant rehearsal for a performance where there were no second chances. But training against air could only teach so much. To truly understand the sword's bite and to test their precision, samurai engaged in temshijiri, or test cutting. Using carefully prepared rolled straw mats or bamboo posts as targets, they would practice their cuts on actual objects. This was the ultimate reality check. A perfectly executed cut would slice cleanly through the target with a specific, satisfying feel and sound. A flawed cut, however, would leave a ragged tear or fail to cut through entirely, exposing errors in angle, edge alignment, or power. This immediate, tangible feedback was indispensable for refining technique and building the confidence that their skills were battle-ready. It transformed theoretical knowledge into practical, visceral understanding. This entire process of daily swordsmanship was inextricably linked to the sacred duty of caring for the blade itself. The ritual of maintenance was itself a form of training, a quiet, focused practice in respect and discipline. After every practice session, without fail, the samurai would meticulously clean and oil the blade to prevent even a speck of rust from tarnishing its legendary sharpness. This intimate act reinforced the bond between warrior and weapon, a constant reminder that this was not a simple tool but a cherished partner. The relentless cycle of swing, form, cut, and care was a lifelong pursuit of perfection, a daily grind that transformed a piece of polished steel into an expression of the samurai's very soul. While the katana was the soul of the samurai, the bow, or yumi, was its equal in both honor and lethality, representing the warrior's ability to strike from a distance with both power and grace. Archery, known as kujutsu, was a discipline that demanded a unique fusion of immense physical strength, serene mental composure, and almost supernatural precision. The samurai bow itself was a marvel of engineering, asymmetrical and towering over 7 feet tall, crafted from layers of bamboo and wood to create a weapon that required tremendous power to draw. This was not the swift, lightweight archery of many other cultures. This was a slow, deliberate, and profoundly demanding art form. A typical day of archery training began with the most fundamental and grueling of exercises, simply drawing the bow and holding it at full extension. A samurai would stand for what felt like an eternity, muscles screaming, as he aimed at a distant target without releasing the arrow. This exercise, known as yudaoshi, was less about shooting and more about forging the body. It built the incredible strength needed in the back, shoulders, and arms to control the heavy bow, while simultaneously training the mind to remain calm and focused under extreme physical duress. The goal was to achieve a state of absolute stillness at the moment of full draw, where the archer's breathing was controlled and his aim was rock solid, despite the immense strain. Once this foundational strength was established, accuracy drills took over. Stationary practice involved shooting at a variety of targets, from the standard motto straw bullseye to smaller, more challenging objects, often placed at varying distances. But the true pinnacle of samurai archery was its practice from horseback, a discipline called yabusame. This was the ultimate test of coordination, balance, and focus. A warrior would guide his galloping horse down a narrow track with his knees, freeing both hands to draw the bow, nock an arrow, and fire at up to 3 wooden targets in rapid succession. Each shot was a split-second calculation of speed, timing, and movement, requiring the archer to become one with his horse, to anticipate the rhythm of its gallop, and to release the arrow at the exact moment of stillness between the animal's strides. Mastery of yabusame was a spectacle of martial artistry, demonstrating a samurai's elite status and his perfect harmony with his steed. This training was relentless and conducted under any and all conditions. A samurai would practice in driving rain that blurred his vision, in gusting winds that challenged his aim, and in the oppressive heat of summer. There was a critical purpose to this hardship, to ensure that no external circumstance could break his concentration or undermine his skill. The mental focus required was every bit as intense as the physical. The archer sought to enter a state of zanshin, a word that translates to remaining mind or lingering spirit. It describes a total, aware presence that persists before, during, and after the release of the arrow. In this state, the archer is not just concentrating on the target. He is fully connected to his body, his bow, the arrow, and the entire environment, ready to respond to any outcome. This profound mindfulness, cultivated through thousands of repetitions in all conceivable conditions, transformed archery from a mere martial skill into a moving meditation, a direct expression of the samurai's disciplined spirit. Beyond the iconic sword and the revered bow lay a weapon that often decided the fate of entire battles, the spear or yari. In the chaotic press of large-scale warfare, where the elegant, sweeping motions of the katana could be hindered by the crush of bodies, the yari was the true king of the battlefield. Its long reach allowed a samurai to strike an opponent from a safe distance, and its versatility made it a formidable tool for both offensive charges and defensive formations. Mastering the spear, a discipline known as sujutsu, was therefore not an optional skill, but an absolute necessity for any warrior who expected to survive the melee of a real war. Training with the yari began with a brutal focus on the fundamentals, primarily the thrust. A samurai would spend countless hours repeating a single, devastating forward stab, known as tsuki. This was not a wild lunge. It was a controlled, powerful extension of the entire body, driving from the back foot through the hips and along the straight line of the spear's shaft, putting the full force of the warrior's weight behind the razor-sharp point. The goal was to develop a thrust so fast and precise it could find the vulnerable gaps between an enemy's armor plates. To build the immense stamina and muscle control required, trainees would often practice with a shinai yari, a practice spear made from bamboo, repeatedly striking a designated target like a tree trunk or a hanging straw bundle until their hands were raw and their shoulders burned. This monotonous, grueling repetition was the only way to make the deadly motion instinctual. But Sujutsu was far more than just lunging forward. A master spearman was also trained in a wide array of defensive maneuvers and controlling techniques. He learned to use the length of his weapon to his advantage, deflecting incoming sword strikes or other spears with sharp, parrying motions called harai and yuke. He practiced sweeping the butt of the spear, the ishizuki, to disrupt an opponent's footing or deliver a stunning blow. Crucially, he trained to maintain the all-important mai, or combat distance, using the spear's reach to keep threats at bay while constantly seeking an opening for his own attack. This constant interplay of offense and defense was practiced through structured forms, or kata, which taught the warrior how to respond to a multitude of potential attacks and scenarios, from facing a single swordsman to being surrounded by multiple opponents. The most critical and dangerous part of this training was sparring. Using practice spears with blunted tips, samurai would engage in full contact drills, testing their skills against a living, resisting partner. This was where theory met reality. A warrior learned to read his opponent's intentions in the subtle shifts of their stance and the gleam in their eyes. He felt the jarring impact of a blocked thrust and the swift retaliation that followed a missed strike. This live practice was essential for developing timing, reflexes, and the cold nerve required to remain calm and effective when a sharpened steel point was aimed directly at his heart. The relentless clatter of practice spears in the training grounds was the sound of warriors preparing for the brutal reality of the battlefield, ensuring that when the time came, the yari would feel not like a separate tool, but a natural extension of their own will to survive and prevail. Yet for all the reach of the spear and the slash of the sword, a samurai knew that combat could collapse into a desperate, breathless struggle at arm's length. When an enemy closed the distance, or when a warrior found himself disarmed and facing an armored opponent, his survival depended on a completely different set of skills: the brutal, efficient art of jujutsu, the gentle art of yielding. This wasn't about overwhelming force. It was about subtlety, leverage, and using an adversary's own energy and momentum to defeat them. A samurai's daily jujutsu training was a world away from the flowing throws we might see in modern martial arts demonstrations. It was pragmatic, direct, and designed for life or death efficiency. The foundation was built on three core principles: Neige waza throwing techniques, Kataime waza grappling and joint locks, and Eitmi waza precise strikes to vulnerable points. Every drill was practiced with the reality of the battlefield in mind. A warrior would train in his full armor, learning how his mobility was affected and how to adapt his techniques accordingly. The goal was never a prolonged, theatrical ground fight. It was to disable or unbalance an opponent instantly, creating a fatal opening for a dagger or creating enough distance to retrieve a primary weapon. The essence of jujutsu philosophy is captured in the concept of ju, which means gentle or yielding. Imagine trying to stop a large, rolling boulder with your bare hands. You would be crushed. But if you were to step aside and simply give it a push in the direction it was already going, you could redirect its immense power with minimal effort. This was the samurai's approach to close combat. Through countless repetitive drills with a partner, they learned to feel an opponent's intention through the slightest shift in weight or tension in their grasp. They practiced blending with a push instead of resisting it, pulling an attacker forward to send them stumbling past. They learned to turn a powerful punch into a devastating shoulder lock by moving just inches out of the way and guiding the extended arm into a position of extreme vulnerability. These partner exercises, known as kumiachi, were the heart of daily practice. Two armored samurai would grip each other, not unlike wrestlers, and through a series of pre-arranged forms, they would rehearse responses to every conceivable attack: a grab, a tackle, a wild swing. They drilled the mechanics of hip throws that could topple a larger man, wrist locks that could force a sword from an enemy's grip, and leg sweeps that could bring a charging opponent crashing to the ground. The repetition was grueling, but it was essential for building the muscle memory to execute these complex maneuvers under the extreme stress of real combat, where there was no time for conscious thought. Perhaps the most critical and often overlooked aspect of their training was atme, the art of striking vital points. A fully armored samurai was largely impervious to punches and kicks, but there were always gaps: the throat, the armpits, the inner wrists, the area behind the knee, and the islet of the helmet. Jujutsu masters possessed an intricate knowledge of human anatomy, knowing exactly where a sharp, focused strike with a fist, an elbow, or the hardened edge of a hand could stun, disorient, or paralyze an opponent, making the subsequent throw or lock possible. This combination, a sharp atme to break balance and focus, followed immediately by a decisive throwing or locking technique, was the true essence of their unarmed combat, a seamless flow of controlled violence that turned an enemy's assault into their own downfall. Yet mastering these martial arts was only half the battle. A samurai's true foundation was not just skill, but the raw physical power and seemingly inexhaustible stamina required to wield that skill effectively through hours, or even days, of relentless combat. Imagine the sheer weight of it all. Wearing a full suit of armor that could easily weigh 60 pounds or more, wielding heavy weapons, and fighting under the blistering sun or driving rain. This demanded a body forged not for show, but for supreme function, a level of conditioning achieved through some of the most grueling and practical physical training ever devised. Their regimen was a brutal symphony of bodyweight exercises, all performed with the singular goal of functional strength. There were no weight machines or gym memberships. Their tools were their own bodies and the natural world around them. They practiced chikareshi, or strength stones, carefully carved stones of various weights with handholds, used for lifting, carrying, and throwing. A warrior might hoist a heavy stone onto his shoulder and walk for miles, or perform countless repetitions of squats and overhead presses, building the core and leg strength essential for stability in combat and for enduring long marches. This functional training directly translated to the battlefield, where he might need to lift a fallen comrade or scale a fortress wall. Calisthenics formed another core pillar. Endless repetitions of push-ups, often done with the hands in a fist to condition the knuckles, built the upper body strength needed for powerful sword strikes and drawing a heavy bow. They performed deep, held squats to develop the powerful legs of a horseman and the low, stable stances required for effective swordsmanship. Their entire philosophy was about compound, full-body movements that mimicked the demands of actual combat, creating a body that was not just strong, but powerfully coordinated and resilient. But strength without endurance is useless. A samurai who could deliver one mighty blow but then gasped for breath would be quickly overcome. To build the legendary stamina for which they were known, their training was relentlessly aerobic. They embarked on long runs, not on flat tracks, but over rugged, mountainous terrain, and they did it while wearing their armor. This acclimated their bodies to moving and fighting under that exact load, teaching them to manage their energy and breathe efficiently even under extreme duress. Swimming across rivers in full gear was another common drill. ensuring they could overcome any natural obstacle on a campaign without abandoning their arms or armor. This entire punishing routine was about more than just building muscle and lung capacity. It was about forging an unbreakable will. The daily agony of pushing through exhaustion, of completing one more mile when every fiber screamed to stop, was a mental exercise as much as a physical one. It taught the samurai to detach from discomfort, to push past the limits of what they believed was possible, and to cultivate a deep, unshakable reservoir of grit. This combination of raw power, relentless endurance, and iron discipline created a warrior who was not merely fit, but truly battle-hardened, a physical instrument, perfectly tuned for the unforgiving demands of war. To the samurai, a horse was far more than a simple mode of transportation. It was a living, breathing extension of the warrior himself, a trusted partner in the chaos of battle, whose training was every bit as rigorous and essential as his own. The bond between a warrior and his mount was sacred, cultivated through daily and meticulous drills in the art of bajutsu, or horsemanship. This was not casual riding. It was a complex martial discipline designed to create a single, unified fighting entity, where the line between man and animal blurred into seamless, coordinated action. A samurai's survival on the battlefield often depended on this partnership, making its daily maintenance a non-negotiable pillar of his routine. The foundation of bajutsu was built on the most fundamental, yet incredibly difficult, skills, mounting and dismounting while clad in full armor. Imagine the challenge of heaving 60 or more pounds of rigid iron and leather plates onto the back of a powerful, spirited animal, all without the comfort of a modern saddle with stirrups. They practiced this relentlessly, developing techniques to use the horse's momentum and their own explosive leg strength to vault onto its back smoothly and quickly. This was a critical skill. A warrior who fumbled while mounting under enemy fire was a vulnerable target. Dismounting was equally practiced, often at a full gallop, training the body to roll away from the horse and come up fighting, ready to engage on foot if necessary. Once in the saddle, the real artistry began. A samurai had to achieve what seems almost impossible to the modern rider, controlling the horse's every movement using only his knees, legs, and subtle shifts in weight. His hands were reserved for his weapons, the bow, the spear, or the sword. This required an incredible level of trust and communication between warrior and steed, built through endless repetition. They would practice intricate patterns at different gaits, from a gentle walk to a thundering gallop, with the rider guiding the animal through precise turns, stops, and starts without ever touching the reins. This freed his hands to nock an arrow, level a spear, or draw a blade, transforming the pair into a mobile, highly accurate weapons platform. The most spectacular application of this skill was yabusame, the ritualized horseback archery we touched on earlier, but the spear was perhaps the more common cavalry weapon. Drills with the yari on horseback were a daily occurrence. A warrior would charge at full speed toward a standing target, often a specially crafted straw dummy, and practice the devastating thrust known as uchai. The goal was to time the lunge perfectly with the horse's motion, putting the immense combined momentum of horse and rider behind the spear point to deliver a blow that could punch straight through an enemy's armor. They also practiced defensive maneuvers, learning to parry attacks from other cavalrymen or foot soldiers with the shaft of the spear, while maintaining control of their mount. Finally, a samurai's equestrian training was not confined to an open, flat field. To prepare for the unpredictable terrain of actual campaigns, they would navigate complex obstacle courses daily. This involved guiding their horses at speed through dense forests with low-hanging branches, across rocky streams, over makeshift barriers, and up steep embankments. This taught the horse to be sure-footed and obedient, even in panicked, chaotic environments, and it trained the rider to maintain his balance, his composures, and his readiness to fight no matter how jarring the ride became. This daily dedication to Bajutsu ensured that when the call to battle came, a samurai could charge onto the field with absolute confidence in his most vital partner. Their movements so harmonized they fought as one creature, a true centaur of the ancient world. Yet even with a body honed for war and a spirit aligned to Bushido, a samurai's education was far from complete. The sharpest sword and the strongest arm are useless without a keen, strategic mind to guide them. For the elite warrior class, daily training therefore extended far beyond the physical dojo and into the realm of pure intellect, where they engaged in the meticulous study of strategy and tactics. This was the cerebral counterpart to their physical grind, a disciplined practice of sharpening their decision-making skills through the lessons of history, the wisdom of masters, and the simulated pressures of the battlefield. Their classroom was often a quiet room filled with makimono, intricate hand-painted scrolls that were the textbooks of their time. The most revered of these was, of course, Sun Tzu's The Art of War, a Chinese treatise so influential that it was pored over by generations of samurai. But their library was vast, also including native works like the aforementioned Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi, which delved into the psychology of combat, and countless other tactical manuals specific to their own clan's traditions. Studying these texts was not a passive act of reading. It was an active, intense process of interrogation. A samurai would sit for hours, often with his mentor, debating the meanings behind passages like "all warfare is based on deception," or "the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting." They would discuss how these ancient principles could be applied to the specific geography of their own domain, or against the known tactics of rival clans. This daily intellectual exercise trained them to think several moves ahead, to anticipate an enemy's plans, and to understand that true victory was often achieved before the first arrow was ever fired. But theory alone was not enough. To truly internalize these lessons, samurai constantly analyzed historical battles, both legendary conflicts from centuries past and more recent skirmishes. They would reconstruct these events in painstaking detail, using maps drawn in sand or with small stones to represent troop movements. The goal was to perform a kind of historical autopsy. Why did this flank collapse? What was the decisive moment that turned the tide? What would I have done differently in that commander's position? This practice of after-action analysis cultivated an invaluable sense of critical thinking and hindsight, allowing them to learn from the costly mistakes and brilliant triumphs of others without having to pay the price in blood themselves. This theoretical knowledge was then stress-tested through war games, a practice that could be as demanding as any physical sparring session. In these discussions, a mentor would present a complex, hypothetical scenario. Your forces are outnumbered 2-1 and holding a narrow mountain pass. The enemy has cavalry and a storm is approaching. What is your first move? There were no simple answers. The trainee would have to weigh countless variables: terrain, weather, supplies, troop morale, the enemy's likely behavior, and defend his chosen strategy against rigorous challenge from his teacher and peers. These sessions were designed to be mentally exhausting, forcing the young warrior to think under pressure, to adapt his plans as new intelligence was introduced, and to confront the brutal trade-offs of command. It was here, in the safety of the academy, that they developed the command presence and quick wit they would need to lead men in the chaos of a real engagement, where a single moment of hesitation could mean disaster for everyone who followed them. After the clatter of weapons and the thunder of hooves faded, the samurai's day was far from over. The true mark of an elite warrior wasn't just his prowess in the training grounds. It was his composure in the quiet of the study. The ideal of Bunbu Ryodo, the dual pen and sword, demanded that a samurai be as adept with the brush as he was with the blade. This pursuit of cultural refinement was not a hobby or a passive pastime. It was an active, daily discipline as essential to his identity as any martial art, designed to cultivate the patience, focus, and intellectual depth that completed the warrior's spirit. The most direct expression of this was Shodo, the way of calligraphy. Seated before a sheet of handmade paper, an ink stone, and a brush, the samurai engaged in a practice that was, in its own way, as demanding as drawing a bow. Every aspect of Shodo was a lesson in control. Grinding the ink stick on the stone with water to achieve the perfect consistency required a slow, rhythmic patience that quieted the mind. The act of writing itself was a physical discipline. There was no erasing, no going back. Each character had to be formed in a single, fluid and confident motion. A continuous dance of pressure and release that flowed from the shoulder and through the arm, not just the fingers. A hesitant hand would produce a weak, blotchy line, betraying a lack of conviction. A reckless one would create a messy, undisciplined scrawl. The perfect stroke demonstrated Haijushin, a mind of everyday calm, utterly focused on the present moment. This meticulous control over the brush was seen as a direct reflection of the control a samurai exerted over his own actions in battle and in life. But the content was just as important as the form. A samurai wouldn't simply practice writing random words. He would spend hours carefully copying profound passages from Confucian classics, Buddhist sutras, or poetry anthologies. This was a dual exercise. His hand was mastering the art of the brush, while his mind was absorbing the wisdom within the texts themselves. He might copy a line about righteousness from the Analects, reinforcing the ethical code of Bushido he lived by. He might transcribe a poignant poem about the impermanence of a cherry blossom, a meditation on the fleeting nature of life that every warrior had to accept. This process of study through transcription was a deep, immersive form of learning that engaged both muscle memory and intellect, weaving philosophical concepts into the very fabric of his being. Beyond calligraphy, the study of literature and poetry was a central pillar of their intellectual training. Samurai were expected to be conversant in the great historical epics, like the Tale of the Hike, which recounted the tragic rise and fall of a powerful clan. These stories were not mere entertainment. They were studied as textbooks on strategy, leadership, and the human cost of ambition. They debated the moral choices of the characters, learning vicariously from their triumphs and failures. Perhaps even more revered was the composition of poetry, particularly the succinct, powerful form of haiku, or the more classical waka. The act of distilling a complex emotion or a vivid observation of nature into just 17 syllables required immense mental clarity and precision. A well-crafted poem demonstrated a refined sensitivity and an ability to perceive deep meaning in simplicity qualities that elevated a warrior from a mere soldier to a cultured leader. This dedication to the arts served a crucial psychological purpose. The intense violence and pressure of a samurai's life created a powerful inner tension that needed a counterbalance. The quiet, deliberate focus of Shodo and the reflective nature of literary study provided a vital outlet for that pressure. It was a form of active meditation that allowed them to process their experiences, to reconnect with beauty and tranquility, and to maintain their mental equilibrium. In this way, the dojo and the study were not opposites. They were two complementary chambers of the same forge. One hardened the body and the will for the chaos of the world, while the other refined the spirit and the mind, ensuring that the warrior who wielded such fearsome power was also a person of wisdom, compassion, and profound cultural depth. This pursuit of mental refinement found one of its most profound expressions in an unexpected place: the quiet, minimalist ritual of the tea ceremony, known as Sodo, or the Way of Tea. Far from being a mere social gathering, for the samurai, this was a form of active meditation, a choreographed practice in mindfulness, etiquette, and emotional control that was as vital to their training as any sword drill. In the tranquil setting of the terum, warriors confronted a different kind of challenge, not an enemy to be defeated, but their own restless spirit to be calmed and focused. Every aspect of the ceremony was designed as a lesson in patience and presence. The process itself was deliberately slow and meticulous. From the precise measurement of the vibrant green matcha powder to the rhythmic whisking of the tea into a smooth froth, each movement was performed with absolute intentionality and grace. There was no room for haste or carelessness. A samurai had to learn to move with a serene, economical efficiency, his attention entirely devoted to the task at hand. This cultivated a state of zanshin, that same total awareness he sought in archery, but applied here to the gentle act of serving a bowl of tea. It was a practice in controlling not just the body, but the impulses of the mind, training it to remain in the present moment, rather than racing ahead to the next thought or distraction. The ceremony was also a masterclass in etiquette and situational awareness, skills directly transferable to the complex social and political landscape of a samurai's life. The ritual dictated how to properly enter the low doorway of the terum, a humble act that forced even the most arrogant lord to bow, symbolically leaving his ego outside. It taught how to receive and examine the tea bowl with respectful admiration, how to drink from it in the exact prescribed manner, and how to express gratitude to the host. Every interaction, from the way a utensil was passed to the timing of a compliment, was governed by a deep code of respect. This honed the samurai's ability to read a room, to understand nuanced social cues, and to conduct himself with impeccable grace under the subtle pressure of observation, whether in a peaceful terum or a tense meeting with a rival daimyo. Perhaps most importantly, the tea ceremony served as a crucial sanctuary for emotional equilibrium. The life of a warrior was one of extreme contrasts, bursts of intense violence, and long periods of anxious waiting. The terum, often built in a simple garden hut, was a world apart. Its design emphasized wabi-sabi, an appreciation for rustic simplicity, imperfection, and quiet beauty. Surrounded by natural materials and the soft sound of boiling water, a samurai could temporarily shed the weight of his duty and armor. In this space, he was not a weapon of war, but a guest. Sharing a bowl of tea in silence with others created a profound sense of shared humanity and tranquility. This practice provided an essential psychological reset, allowing him to process the stresses of his vocation and return to his duties with a clearer mind, a calmer heart, and a spirit rebalanced for the challenges ahead. After the final drills of the day, when the body was weary and the mind sought rest, the samurai's duty was still not complete. His most trusted companions, the armor that protected his life, and the weapons that extended his will, required their own form of care. This was not a tedious chore to be rushed through, but a sacred meditative ritual known as bugu no seri, the maintenance of arms and armor. Performed in the quiet hours of the evening, this daily practice was a profound expression of the warrior's philosophy, blending deep respect for his tools with the absolute practical necessity of constant readiness. Imagine the intricate construction of a full suit of samurai armor, the yoroi. It was a masterpiece of functional art, comprised of hundreds of individual parts, small iron or leather scales, kozain laced together with sturdy silk or leather cord, flexible shoulder guards sewed, a formidable helmet kabuto, and a menacing face mask mempo. This was not a single solid shell. It was a complex system designed for maximum mobility and protection. But that very complexity meant it was vulnerable to the elements. A day of strenuous training in the heat would leave the interior soaked with sweat. A session in the rain or mud could cause the lacing to rot and the metal plates to rust with terrifying speed. A single weakened cord or a spot of corrosion could mean the difference between a deflected blow and a fatal injury in the next battle. Therefore, the process of dismantling and cleaning the armor was methodical and reverent. The warrior would first carefully untie the cords and remove the individual components, laying them out in an organized manner. Each leather or iron scale was wiped down with a soft, dry cloth to remove moisture and dirt. If any rust was found on the metal plates, it was meticulously scrubbed away with a mild abrasive like yuzuku, a type of fine clay or rice straw ash, which polished the surface without deeply scratching it. The intricate lacing was inspected strand by strand for any signs of wear, fraying, or weakness. Any damaged sections would be immediately repaired, often by relacing entire panels, a tedious but vital task. Finally, a light application of clove oil might be used on the metal to inhibit future rust, protecting the armor's integrity. This wasn't just cleaning, it was a thorough inspection, a diagnostic ritual to ensure every component was in perfect working order. This same level of devoted attention was given to their weapons. The katana, the soul of the samurai, underwent its own solemn ceremony. Using a specialized kit, the warrior would carefully disassemble the sword, removing the blade from its handle. The blade itself was never touched with bare hands, as the oils from skin could promote rust. Instead, using soft ochiko powder made from fine stone dust, he would gently wipe the steel in a single direction to remove any microscopic particles of dirt or moisture. This was followed by wiping it with a soft, lint-free cloth, again moving from the base to the tip to ensure the legendary edge was never accidentally dulled. The scabbard sewer was also cleaned out to remove any dust or debris that could scratch the blade. Finally, every part was reassembled with the same focused precision, ensuring the grip was tight and the blade sat securely. The bowstrings on their yumi were inspected for frays and waxed, and the shafts of their spears were checked for cracks or splinters. This nightly ritual served multiple critical purposes. On the most practical level, it was about survival. A poorly maintained sword might break in a duel. A rusty arrowhead might not penetrate armor. A loose strap on a helmet could spell disaster. This daily discipline guaranteed that a samurai could be fully equipped and ready for combat at a moment's notice, whether for a surprise night attack or an unexpected call to duty from their lord. But on a deeper level, this was a moving meditation on gratitude and interdependence. As the warrior ran his hands over each cord and each plate, he was reminded of the countless artisans whose skill had created these tools, and of the lives these objects had protected, perhaps even his own. It reinforced the concept that his ability to wield power was dependent on his care for the instruments of that power. The respect shown to inanimate objects was a reflection of the respect he held for his own life and his duty. In the quiet act of maintaining his gear, the samurai was not just preparing for the next battle. He was honoring the very path he walked, ensuring that both the warrior and his weapons remained sharp, reliable, and ever ready. Yet all the individual skills, the perfect cuts, the precise stances, the rehearsed forms would mean very little if they couldn't be applied against a thinking, reacting adversary. This is where the training moved from theoretical perfection to practical reality, in the controlled chaos of supervised sparring sessions. Here, in the dust and din of the practice ground, a samurai truly learned what he was made of facing off against a partner armed with a bokken, the heavy, solid oak training sword that could deliver a stunning, bone-jarring blow. This was not a game. It was the closest one could get to real combat without drawing a blade sharp enough to kill. These sparring matches, often referred to as keiko, were a world away from the solitary practice of kata. The goal was to bridge the gap between knowing a technique intellectually and being able to execute it under pressure. A senior instructor would closely supervise, ensuring the drills remained productive and that safety was maintained, but the intensity was very real. The distinct, thunderous crack of two bokken colliding was the sound of lessons being learned the hard way. A mistimed block resulted in a painful welt on the arm. A slow reaction meant a solid thwack to the helmet or body armor. This immediate physical feedback was an unforgiving but brutally effective teacher, searing the consequences of error into the warrior's muscle memory and mindset. The value of this live practice went far beyond simply getting used to being hit. It was the ultimate test of a samurai's adaptability and composure. In a kata, every move of the opponent is predetermined. In sparring, nothing is. An adversary might feint high and strike low, or use an unexpected combination of attacks. This forced the trainee to read his partner's intentions through subtle shifts in posture, the angle of their shoulders, or the gleam in their eyes. He learned to perceive the almost imperceptible tells that signaled an incoming strike, honing his reflexes to near instinctual levels. The chaotic, unpredictable nature of these exchanges trained the mind to remain calm and analytical amidst the flurry of action, to find openings where none seemed to exist, and to adapt his strategy on the fly. Perhaps the most profound lesson learned in the sparring circle was the concept of tsuteme, or total commitment. A half-hearted attack with a wooden sword is easily seen, parried, and countered. A trainee quickly learned that to be effective, a strike had to be delivered with full conviction and without hesitation, even in practice. This meant committing mentally and physically to an action, understanding that it might leave you temporarily vulnerable, but trusting your skill to see it through or recover instantly. This cultivated a decisive spirit, teaching the warrior to act rather than react, to seize the initiative and control the flow of the engagement. It was here, in the repeated, exhausting clash of wood on wood, that the samurai forged not just better technique, but the unshakable nerve and strategic mind that would define him on the battlefield. A true battlefield is never a flat, pristine dueling ground. It is a messy, unpredictable tapestry of dense forests, jagged mountains, and rushing rivers. The samurai understood that mastering the dojo was only the beginning. To survive, they had to become one with the land itself. Their training, therefore, extended far beyond the manicured grounds of their estates, and into the wild, unforgiving heart of nature. This was environmental conditioning, a brutal and essential curriculum designed to forge a warrior who is not just skilled, but supremely adaptable, capable of turning any terrain, no matter how hostile, into a weapon and an advantage. They would embark on long, grueling marches known as kodo, or hard road training, deliberately seeking out the most challenging landscapes. A group of samurai, laden with their full armor and weapons, might spend days navigating steep, rocky mountain paths. The goal was twofold: to build the incredible leg strength and cardiovascular endurance needed to attack from high ground or retreat under pressure, and to learn to move with stability and silence, even on unstable, treacherous footing. Every loose stone and crumbling edge was a lesson in reading the ground beneath their feet, a skill that could prevent a fatal misstep during a night ambush or a chaotic retreat. They learned to use the terrain itself for cover, hugging cliff faces to avoid being seen from below, and using boulders as shelter from arrows. the forest presented a completely different set of challenges and lessons. Here, the focus shifted to stealth and surprise. Samurai practiced shinobi aruki, the art of silent movement. This involved learning to walk with a unique rolling gait that distributed weight evenly, allowing them to glide over twigs and dry leaves without making a sound. They trained to use the dappled shadows and dense undergrowth for concealment, freezing into absolute stillness at the slightest hint of a threat. A common drill involved one group of warriors attempting to move through a wooded area undetected, while another group acted as sentries, their sharp ears tuned to any crackle of foliage or misplaced shadow. This honed their perception to an almost supernatural level, teaching them to see what shouldn't be there and to hear what was almost inaudible. Then there was the element of water. A river was not an obstacle to be avoided, but a training ground to be conquered. Samurai would practice fording fast-moving, chest-deep currents while keeping their armor and weapons dry and ready. This required immense strength to resist the current and meticulous balance to navigate slippery, unseen rocks on the riverbed. They trained in swimming techniques while wearing their armor, a skill that could save their life during a flooded retreat or an amphibious assault. Perhaps most impressive was their practice of using water itself as a tool. They learned to read the flow of a river to predict the easiest crossing points for an army, or to identify areas where the current could be used to sweep away an enemy's defensive positions. They understood that a sudden downpour could muffle the sound of an approaching army, while a dried-up riverbed could provide a hidden path for a flanking maneuver. This deep, intuitive connection to the natural world ensured that no matter where a battle took place, the samurai was never on foreign ground. He was a master of his environment, using every hill, tree, and stream to secure his victory. All this relentless training, the hours of swordsmanship, the grueling marches, the intense mental focus, demanded a powerful and reliable source of energy. A samurai's body was his primary instrument, and like any high-performance machine, it required the right fuel to function at its peak. But their diet wasn't about indulgence or even variety. It was a reflection of the same principles that guided their entire lives: discipline, efficiency, and a profound connection to the resources of their land. Their daily meals were a study in purposeful simplicity, designed to build a body that was lean, strong, and resilient, capable of enduring the extreme physical demands of campaign life. The absolute cornerstone of their diet, the food that provided the bulk of their caloric intake, was rice. Specifically, it was hakumai, or unpolished brown rice. Unlike the white rice that became more common for the upper classes later on, brown rice retained its bran and germ, making it a far more nutritionally complete food. It was a slow-burning, complex carbohydrate that provided sustained energy for long hours of exertion, packed with essential B vitamins for nerve function and metabolism, and containing valuable fiber for digestive health. A typical meal for a samurai would feature a large bowl of this steamed rice, often accompanied by a simple miso soup made from fermented soybean paste, which provided protein, probiotics for gut health, and vital minerals. This combination was the unshakable foundation of their nutritional intake. Meal after meal, to this base, they would add whatever vegetables were in season and readily available. The Japanese archipelago offered a bounty of nutritious plants: daikon radish, burdock root, leafy greens like komatsuna, mushrooms foraged from the forests, and sea vegetables like nori and wakame harvested from the coast. These weren't just side dishes. They were crucial sources of vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants that helped their bodies recover from intense physical stress and stave off illness. Protein was incorporated primarily from the sea. Fish like salmon, mackerel, and sardines were common. offering high-quality protein for muscle repair and powerful omega-3 fatty acids that reduced inflammation and supported cognitive function essential for a sharp mind on the battlefield. Meat from land animals like wild boar or fowl was consumed, but it was a much rarer luxury, not a daily staple. The overall picture was one of a predominantly plant-based and pescatarian diet, high in complex carbs and nutrients, but relatively low in fat. This dietary discipline extended beyond mere sustenance into the realm of mental conditioning. Fasting, or deliberately abstaining from food for set periods, was a common practice, though not in the sense of starving themselves. It was a controlled exercise in self-denial, meant to strengthen the spirit and prove that the mind could master the body's desires. Before a major battle or during a period of intense spiritual training, a samurai might restrict his intake to only the most basic foods, or even just water, for a day or more. This taught him to operate effectively while hungry, to push through the discomfort of an empty stomach, and to understand that his willpower was not dependent on a full belly. It was the culinary equivalent of standing under a freezing waterfall, a deliberate embrace of hardship to forge greater inner strength. This combination of a clean, efficient diet for physical performance and the strategic use of fasting for mental fortitude created a warrior who was not only powerfully built, but also possessed of an iron will, capable of enduring the privations of war without his resolve breaking. As dusk settled and the last echoes of training faded, a samurai's day transitioned from outward exertion to inward reflection. The physical rigor was complete, but the mental and spiritual work was just beginning. This was the time for hansei, the practice of sincere self-reflection. In the quiet solitude of evening, often by the soft glow of an oil lamp, the warrior would sit to meditate and journal, meticulously examining every action, thought, and interaction of the day against the unforgiving mirror of Bushido. This wasn't a mere diary entry. It was a rigorous audit of the soul, a daily commitment to perpetual growth that ensured his path never strayed from the way of the warrior. The process began with meditation, a deliberate quieting of the mind to achieve the clarity necessary for honest self-assessment. Unlike the morning's zazen, which prepared the spirit for the day ahead, this evening practice was about review and release. The samurai would focus on his breathing, allowing the chatter of the day the pride of a well-executed kata, the frustration of a missed strike, the lingering anger from a sharp word with a comrade, to gradually settle. In this state of calm detachment, he could begin the difficult work of dissecting his own performance without the distortion of ego or emotion. The goal was to see himself with absolute objectivity, as his sensei might see him, or as an opponent would perceive his weaknesses. With his mind clear, he would then take up his brush and journal, engaging in what was known as nikki or kanso. The content of these entries was highly structured and purposeful. He wouldn't simply record events, he would analyze them. He'd start by cataloging his training. During sparring, my defense was weak on the left side. I allowed pride to make me aggressive and was struck 3 times. During horseback archery, my release was hesitant on the second target. Every mistake, no matter how small, was documented without excuse. This meticulous record-keeping served as a tangible log of progress and recurring flaws, allowing him to identify patterns in his behavior that needed correction. It was a data-driven approach to self-mastery centuries before the term was coined, but the journal went far beyond technical critique. The deepest scrutiny was reserved for his moral and ethical conduct. He would pose challenging questions to himself, guided by the 7 virtues of Bushido. Did I act with true courage today, or was my bravery merely a performance for others? Was I fully loyal to my lord in both action and private thought? Did I show disrespect to my training partner in my moment of frustration? This was the heart of Hansei, a fearless confrontation with his own character. He would recount conversations, examining not just what was said, but the intention behind his words. He celebrated moments where he lived up to the code, but he dedicated far more energy to dissecting his failures, understanding that true growth lay in acknowledging and correcting these shortcomings. This practice of daily reflection was the essential feedback loop that connected all other training. The physical skills honed in the yard, the strategic concepts studied in the academy, and the spiritual principles meditated upon at dawn, all were validated and refined through this nightly reckoning. It transformed experience into wisdom. A mistake in sparring became a lesson in humility. A successfully navigated social interaction became a reaffirmation of respect. By holding himself accountable to his highest ideals every single night, the samurai ensured that his pursuit of perfection was not just a physical or intellectual exercise, but a holistic, never-ending journey of becoming. The journal became his most honest sensei, a silent teacher that reflected back not who he wished to be, but who he truly was, and who he was determined to become. The changing seasons were not an excuse for rest, but a dynamic training partner, constantly varying the challenges a samurai had to master. Their annual cycle was a carefully orchestrated curriculum that used the extreme conditions of each season to forge different aspects of their warrior spirit, ensuring their readiness was not a fair weather phenomenon but a constant, year-round state of being. As the intense heat of summer settled over Japan, training shifted to capitalize on the brutal conditions. This was the season of extreme endurance, where the sun itself became a weapon to temper their resilience. Drills were deliberately scheduled for the hottest part of the day, turning the training grounds into a furnace. Warriors would engage in long runs across sun-baked fields while wearing their heavy armor, their bodies learning to conserve water, manage energy, and push through the fog of heat exhaustion. Sparring sessions were prolonged, forcing combatants to maintain technique and focus. Even as sweat blurred, their vision and fatigue made their limbs feel like lead. The goal was to acclimate the body to function at its peak, under the most physically draining circumstances, preparing them for the reality of summer campaigns, where dehydration and heat stroke could decimate an army faster than any enemy blade. This grueling regimen built a profound level of stamina, teaching the samurai that his greatest opponent was often his own desire to quit, and that true strength meant conquering that inner voice. When the fierce summer heat gave way to the biting chill of winter, the nature of their training transformed completely. The focus shifted inward, from exhausting the body to fortifying the mind against the insidious siege of cold. Winter was the season of mental conditioning, where the sharp, dry air was used to hone focus and discipline. The pre-dawn meditation practice, always challenging, became a supreme test of will. Seated in the open air or in unheated halls, samurai had to achieve a state of calm focus while their bodies shivered, their breath hanging in frosty clouds before them. This taught them to detach from physical discomfort, to find a core of inner warmth and stillness that no external cold could extinguish. Weapons training continued relentlessly outdoors. Handling a cold, metal sword with bare hands became an exercise in pain tolerance, while drawing a bow with stiff fingers tested fine motor control under duress. Practicing maneuvers in deep snow or on icy ground demanded incredible balance and adaptability, turning every drill into a lesson in overcoming environmental adversity. The quiet, stark landscape of winter, devoid of summer's distractions, was the perfect canvas for cultivating the unshakable patience, clarity, and icy resolve that defined the samurai spirit. Yet the annual cycle wasn't solely about relentless hardship. It was also punctuated by moments where discipline met display. Seasonal festivals and gatherings provided a vital platform for martial demonstrations, seamlessly integrating their training into the cultural and social fabric of their communities. These events, such as the autumn harvest festivals or celebrations at a lord's castle, were opportunities to showcase their hard-won skills, not in anger, but in a spirit of artistry and competition. The most famous of these demonstrations was Yabusame, the ritual horseback archery often performed at Shinto shrines to entertain the gods and pray for a good harvest. Clad in magnificent hunting attire from the Kamakura period, samurai would gallop down a narrow track, releasing arrows at wooden targets with breathtaking precision. This was far more than a spectacle. It was a public examination of their equestrian and archery skills, performed under the immense pressure of an audience that included their lord, peers, and the general populace. A missed target was a public mark against their honor, while a perfect performance elevated their status and inspired awe. These festivals served a dual purpose. They allowed the warriors to test their skills in a high-stakes, non-lethal environment, and they reinforced the samurai's role as protectors and pillars of the community, their incredible abilities on full display for all to see and respect. This rhythm, the intense physical forging of summer, the deep mental fortification of winter, and the ceremonial integration of their art throughout the year, created a complete, holistic training cycle that left no part of the warrior undeveloped. Every masterful cut, every perfectly held stance, every moment of strategic clarity, these were not born solely from solitary practice. They were forged in the crucible of daily mentorship, under the watchful eye of a sensei. In the world of the samurai, the relationship between teacher and student was the sacred conduit through which centuries of accumulated knowledge, both technical and spiritual, flowed from one generation to the next. This was not a casual arrangement. It was a profound bond of trust, respect, and absolute commitment that formed the very backbone of a warrior's education. The sensei was far more than a simple instructor. He was a living library of combat experience, a guardian of the school's unique traditions, and a moral compass for his students. His authority was absolute, and his word was final, not out of tyranny, but because his judgment was forged in the fires of real experience that his students had yet to face. A young samurai's day was structured around his sensei's guidance. Training sessions were intensely supervised, with the master moving through the ranks of students, his sharp eyes missing nothing. A slight error in the angle of a wrist, a fraction of an inch in foot placement, a hint of hesitation in a movement, all were immediately corrected, not with gentle suggestion, but with direct, unambiguous feedback. This immediate and precise correction was invaluable. It prevented the student from ingraining bad habits, ensuring that every repetition was a step toward perfection, rather than a reinforcement of error. The sensei's role was to mold the raw potential of the student, shaping them with the same meticulous care a master swordsmith would use to fold steel, removing impurities and strengthening the core. But the lessons extended far beyond the physical dojo. In the quiet moments after training, or during structured gatherings, the sensei would become a storyteller, a keeper of the school's oral history. He would recount tales of the founder's genius, of legendary duels fought by past masters, and of pivotal battles where the school's techniques were tested and proven. These were not mere entertainment. They were vital, living textbooks. Through these narratives, students learned the practical application of their kata. They understood why a certain technique was developed for a specific type of attack, or how a particular strategy had turned the tide of a long-ago conflict. More importantly, these stories embedded the school's values and ethos into the hearts of the students. They learned about the honor of past masters, the consequences of their failures, and the brilliance of their victories. This created a powerful sense of lineage and belonging, connecting the young trainee to a long, unbroken chain of warriors who had come before him. He was no longer just an individual practicing in isolation. He was a temporary bearer of a sacred legacy, with a duty to uphold its standards and eventually pass it on, unblemished, to the next generation. This master-apprentice model was the ecosystem that preserved the integrity of the samurai's vast knowledge. Complex skills, particularly the subtle nuances of strategy, the psychological aspects of combat, and the deep philosophical tenets of Bushido, cannot be fully captured in scrolls alone. They require demonstration, dialogue, and personal adjustment. The sensei provided this living context. He could explain the why behind the what, adapting ancient principles to the student's unique temperament and physical capabilities. He challenged their assumptions, posed ethical dilemmas, and pushed them to think critically. This daily, intimate interaction ensured that wisdom was not just memorized, but truly understood and internalized, transforming abstract concepts into instinctual action. The goal was for the student to eventually transcend mere imitation of the teacher, absorbing the principles so completely that they could express them in their own unique and effective way, thus ensuring the art itself remained a living, evolving tradition, forever sharp and relevant. The relentless pursuit of perfection came at a steep physical cost. A samurai's daily regimen was a brutal grind that inevitably inflicted a heavy toll on the body. Common injuries were a fact of life, not a sign of failure. The repetitive stress of thousands of sword cuts led to chronic tendinitis in the shoulders and elbows, known then as katakori, a persistent shoulder stiffness that plagued many warriors. The powerful, twisting motions of spearmanship and the impact of sparring with bokken resulted in deep muscle bruises, sprained wrists, and occasionally broken fingers. Practicing horseback archery and maintaining stability in the saddle for hours on end put immense strain on the lower back and hips. Perhaps most dangerously, the constant practice of high-impact throws and falls in jiu-jitsu, often on unforgiving ground, led to a high frequency of joint dislocations, especially in the shoulders, and repetitive concussions from striking the head, even through helmet padding. These were not occasional setbacks. They were the background noise of a life dedicated to the martial path. To address this constant wear and tear, samurai developed a sophisticated system of recovery rooted in the traditional medicine of the era, known as kampo. Herbal remedies were their first and most trusted line of defense. For inflammation and muscle pain, a poultice made from the roots of the kudzu plant was commonly applied, as it was believed to draw out heat and reduce swelling. The analgesic properties of ginger and cinnamon were harnessed in oils for massaging sore muscles and stiff joints. For deep tissue bruises and to promote healing, a paste made from the gardenia fruit was used, its yellow pigment staining the skin as it worked. Internally, warriors might drink teas brewed from Chinese foxglove root to nourish the blood and bones, or consume extracts from the ashitaba plant, a green now famous for its regenerative properties, to aid in overall recovery and stamina. These natural pharmacies were essential for managing pain and keeping the body functional day after day. Rest, however, was a more complicated concept. The modern idea of a full rest day was virtually non-existent. Instead, samurai adhered to the principle of jundo, or moderate motion. If a warrior suffered a leg injury, his training would not stop. It would adapt. He might sit and perform hundreds of repetitions of sword drawing, or focus exclusively on upper body conditioning and calligraphy. This active recovery ensured that the spirit of daily discipline remained unbroken, even if the body's capabilities were temporarily limited. Complete immobilization was seen as a last resort, reserved for severe breaks or fevers. Sleep was considered a critical pillar of recovery, with strict protocols for winding down the mind through evening meditation to ensure the body's natural healing processes could work uninterrupted. Their approach was about intelligent, active management of the injury, not passive retreat from training. Underpinning this entire approach was a profound and unique mindset toward pain and weakness. Enduring physical discomfort was not just accepted, it was expected and embraced as an integral part of the path to mastery. A samurai was taught to practice nintai, patient endurance. This was not a passive suffering, but an active, almost observant relationship with pain. They learned to mentally separate their conscious mind from the screaming signals of their nerves, to acknowledge the sensation without being controlled by it. Aching muscles from yesterday's training were not an excuse, but a reminder of effort expended. A fresh bruise from a sparring match was a lesson etched onto the body. To complain of such things was a sign of a weak spirit, an indulgence that could not be tolerated. This mindset was rigorously enforced by the sensei, who would often push students to continue training through minor injuries, teaching them that the body's threshold for pain was far beyond what the mind initially claimed. This was not reckless machismo. It was a calculated cultivation of mental fortitude. The philosophy was simple yet severe. If you could not master your own body's complaints and limitations, you had no hope of mastering an opponent in combat. The daily confrontation with pain was the furnace in which their legendary resilience was forged, transforming physical suffering into a tool for building an unbreakable will. In this world of absolute discipline, the slightest sign of laziness or failure was not merely a personal shortcoming. It was a crack in the foundation of the entire warrior ethos, and it was met with immediate, uncompromising correction. The culture of excellence was not sustained by encouragement alone. It was rigorously enforced through a structured system of consequences designed to be so unpleasant that they powerfully incentivized focus and effort. A missed strike in practice, a moment of hesitation during sparring, or a complaint about the grueling nature of the training was never ignored. It was a teachable moment, and the lessons were often harsh. For minor infractions, the consequences were direct and physically demanding. A warrior who showed a lack of focus might be ordered to perform hundreds of extra repetitions of a basic cut, long after the official training session had ended and his muscles were screaming in protest. This was not just about building muscle memory. It was about burning the importance of concentration into his very being through exhaustion. Another common punishment was being assigned the most tedious and laborious chores around the training grounds, scrubbing the floors of the dojo until they shone, cleaning the communal armor and weapons of senior students, or hauling heavy stones and water for hours. This reinforced the concept that every task, no matter how menial, was part of their duty and deserved their full attention and best effort. For more serious failures, such as showing cowardice, disrespect to a superior, or a consistent neglect of their duties, the punishments escalated to target both body and spirit. Fasting was a particularly powerful tool. Being denied the simple but vital meals of rice and fish was a stark reminder that the privilege of strength came with the responsibility to maintain it. An empty stomach amplified the difficulty of the next day's training, forcing the student to confront his weakness and find motivation not in external reward, but in the sheer force of his own will. This practice of self-denial was a direct lesson in the Bushido virtue of endurance. The most severe reprimands, however, were not physical but social and psychological. Public shaming was a devastatingly effective deterrent. A student might be forced to stand silently before his peers and instructors while his errors were meticulously recounted. His honor temporarily stripped away to illustrate the gravity of his failure. In extreme cases, he could be temporarily ostracized, ignored by his fellow trainees and mentors, creating a profound sense of isolation that drove home the point that his actions had consequences for the entire group. This reinforced the core samurai belief in collective responsibility, and the idea that one warrior's failure reflected poorly on his sensei, his dojo, and his lord. Yet it is crucial to understand that this system was not rooted in mere cruelty. From the modern perspective, it seems unbearably strict, but within the context of their reality, it was a matter of life and death. A sensei's harshness was a form of brutal compassion. He knew that a moment of laziness in the dojo could translate to a fatal hesitation on the battlefield. A poorly maintained sword might break in a duel. An inability to push through hunger and fatigue could get an entire unit killed on a long campaign. The punishments were designed to be memorable, to create such a strong negative association with failure that the student would do anything to avoid repeating it. The goal was to forge a warrior who was not only technically proficient, but also possessed of an ironclad discipline that would hold firm under the extreme pressures of war, where there were no second chances and the cost of neglect was measured in blood. The line between dedicated training and daily duty was often invisible, because for a samurai they were one and the same. His entire existence was a living dojo, and every task, no matter how mundane, was an opportunity to practice his art. Consider the simple act of standing guard at his lord's gate for hours on end. This wasn't passive waiting. It was an exercise in supreme vigilance and unwavering endurance. Stationed motionless in full armor, he would practice mokuso, silent meditation with his eyes open, honing his awareness to detect the slightest anomaly, a distant footfall that didn't match the cadence of a friendly patrol, a flicker of movement in the periphery, the unnatural silence of the night birds. His posture was a martial stance, his grip on his spear a ready position. This daily duty drilled into him the patience and hyper-awareness that were critical for spotting ambushes or sensing the tension in a crowd before a conflict even began. Patrols through the domain's villages and along its borders were another routine task that served as continuous field training. A samurai and his unit walking a predetermined route were not just showing the flag. They were constantly reading their environment with a warrior's eye. They noted the condition of bridges and roads, assessing potential choke points and avenues of attack. They observed the mood of the peasants, understanding that social unrest could be an early warning of larger problems. They practiced moving in formation, maintaining spacing and silent communication through hand signals, their eyes constantly scanning the tree lines and rooftops. A sudden rabbit bursting from a thicket became a drill in threat assessment and weapon readiness. A fallen tree across the path was an exercise in navigating an obstacle while maintaining defensive positions. There was no off switch. Their guard was always up, their minds constantly processing the landscape as a potential battlefield, turning a simple walk into a relentless exercise in situational awareness. Even their service within their lord's household, seemingly the most domestic of duties, was imbued with martial practice. Serving at a formal dinner required the same precise, economical movements as drawing a sword. The way a samurai would kneel, present a tray, or pour tea was executed with a controlled grace that mirrored the flowing forms of his kata. This was not about etiquette for its own sake. It was about cultivating a body that was always balanced, always in control, and always ready to transition from a gesture of respect to a defensive movement in an instant. The intense focus required to perform these domestic rituals flawlessly under the gaze of their lord and guests was the same focus needed to execute a perfect parry under the pressure of combat. It was all a seamless continuum of discipline. This integration meant that the distinction between training and working simply didn't exist. A blacksmith forges a blade in the fire and then tempers it in water. Both steps are essential to creating a finished weapon. Similarly, the samurai's formal drills in the courtyard were the fire, the intense, focused heat of pure technique. His daily duties were the tempering the continuous, cooler application of those skills in real-world contexts that gave them flexibility, resilience, and practical purpose. One without the other was incomplete. The formal drill without daily application was theoretical and brittle. The daily duty without the foundational drill was untrained and clumsy. Together they created a warrior whose art was not something he did, but something he was, in every waking moment of his life. This ancient and all-encompassing approach to warrior cultivation did not vanish with the last samurai. Its core principles were carefully preserved, repackaged, and passed down, evolving into the modern martial arts and fitness philosophies we recognize today. The direct lineage is most visibly alive in the controlled, explosive strikes of kendo. When a kendoka dons the bogu armor and faces an opponent, they are participating in a ritualized echo of samurai combat. The relentless drilling of basic cuts, or sabari, is a direct inheritance from the thousands of repetitive strikes a samurai would perform daily to forge muscle memory. The focus on proper footwork, posture, and the decisive, singular spirit behind each attack all stem from the need for a killing blow in battle. Even the intense shouting, or kiai, is not merely for intimidation. It is the physical manifestation of focusing one's entire spirit and energy into a single moment, a concept any Edo period swordsman would have understood intimately as kai. Beyond the obvious physical arts, the samurai's influence permeates the very philosophy of disciplines like Aikido and Judo. These gentler martial arts are living testaments to the samurai's jujutsu training, the art developed for disarming and neutralizing an armored opponent without relying on brute strength. The core principle of Ju, or yielding using an attacker's momentum and force against them, is the central tenet of Aikido. When an Aikidoka blends with a push and redirects it into a throw, they are demonstrating the same elegant, efficient physics a samurai would have used on a chaotic battlefield. Similarly, the grappling and throwing techniques of Judo find their roots in the close combat kumiachi drills, adapted for a modern, competitive sport that still emphasizes mental discipline, respect, and the perfection of form. The relevance of this ancient routine extends far beyond the dojo walls and into the very heart of contemporary fitness and wellness culture. The modern fascination with functional fitness, training the body for real-world movements and resilience rather than just for appearance, is a direct parallel to the samurai's pragmatic conditioning. Their use of heavy stones, chikareshi for lifting and carrying, is the historical precursor to today's kettlebell swings and sandbag workouts, both designed to build strength that is useful and transferable. Their long armor-clad runs over mountainous terrain are the equivalent of today's weighted rucksacks and hike-based endurance challenges, all training the body to perform under load and duress. Perhaps the most profound and widespread adoption of samurai philosophy is in the mainstream embrace of mindfulness and mental conditioning. The samurai's daily practice of zazen meditation to achieve a state of mushin, or no mind, has found a new audience in corporate boardrooms, sports psychology, and stress management clinics. The ability to quiet mental chatter, to achieve clarity under pressure, and to act without the hesitation born of fear or ego, is as valuable to a modern executive or athlete as it was to a warrior facing a duel. The practice of hansei, or daily self-reflection, is echoed in the popular habit of journaling for personal growth, where examining one's actions and seeking continuous improvement is a path to a more disciplined and purposeful life. The samurai understood that a sharp mind was the most critical weapon, a lesson we are collectively relearning in our fast-paced, distraction-filled world. Ultimately, the legacy of the samurai's daily grind is not found in a specific technique or weapon, but in a timeless blueprint for holistic excellence. It presents a powerful model that integrates the physical, mental, and spiritual into a single disciplined pursuit. In an age of specialization, their example reminds us that true mastery is not just about building a stronger body or a sharper mind in isolation, but about forging them together into an resilient and adaptable whole. Their unwavering commitment to daily practice, to embracing hardship as a tool for growth, and to living by a code of personal honor continues to resonate, offering a path not just to martial prowess, but to a life of greater focus, resilience, and profound purpose. Our romantic image of the samurai, often shaped by cinematic flair and epic tales, can obscure the far more fascinating and disciplined reality of their daily lives. One of the most persistent myths is that their existence was a never-ending series of dramatic, life-or-death duels. While skilled swordsmen certainly tested their abilities, the vast majority of a samurai's combative time was spent not in fighting others, but in a solitary, repetitive dance with an imaginary opponent. The goal was not to accumulate notches on their sword, but to achieve such a deep level of unconscious competence that if a real fight ever occurred, their body would react correctly before their mind had even registered the threat. This reality is far less glamorous than the myth, but it was this very lack of glamour, this dedication to the boring fundamentals, that truly made them lethal. Their legendary status was built on a mountain of unseen, monotonous repetitions, not on a pile of defeated rivals. Another common misconception paints the samurai as possessing almost supernatural, superhuman abilities, as if their skill was a magical gift rather than a hard-earned achievement. This myth ignores the sheer volume of calculated, grueling physical labor that went into their conditioning. There was nothing mystical about the muscle fatigue from performing 1,000 spear thrusts, or the exhaustion from running miles in full armor. It was pure, applied physiology. Their incredible precision with a bow or a sword wasn't a mysterious force. It was the direct result of a feedback loop thousands of hours long. Every imperfect cut into a straw target during temshigeri provided tangible physical data on their edge alignment and form. Their seemingly preternatural calm in battle wasn't an innate trait. It was a trained response, meticulously cultivated through daily meditation and breathing exercises designed to regulate the nervous system under extreme stress. Their superpowers were, in fact, the peak of human potential achieved through systematic, intelligent, and relentless effort. We also tend to compartmentalize the samurai solely as warriors, envisioning their days filled with nothing but martial drills. This overlooks the essential intellectual and artistic half of their identity, the ideal of Bunbu Ryodo. A samurai who was only skilled with a sword was considered incomplete, a blunt instrument. Their daily schedule was deliberately structured to include time for the quiet refinement of calligraphy, the study of classical poetry, and the intricate rituals of the tea ceremony. These practices were not leisurely hobbies. They were complementary training grounds for the mind. The intense focus and controlled breathing required to paint a perfect brushstroke were the same skills needed to steady your aim with a bow. The patience and strategic thinking honed by studying historical texts were directly applicable to battlefield tactics. This balanced approach ensured they were not just fighters, but cultured leaders and administrators, capable of wielding a paintbrush with the same intention and discipline as they wielded a katana. Perhaps the most damaging myth is the notion of the lone wolf Ronin, a masterless samurai relying solely on his unparalleled personal skill. While stories of wandering duelists make for compelling drama, the historical reality was that a samurai's training was deeply embedded within a structured community and a rigid hierarchy. Their development was not a solitary pursuit, but a collective endeavor under the unwavering guidance of a sensei. Knowledge was passed down through direct, personal mentorship within a specific school, or ryu, each with its own guarded secrets and techniques. A samurai's identity and skill were inextricably linked to his lineage and his lord. Training was a social contract, with a deep sense of obligation to one's teachers, one's comrades, and one's clan. This system ensured the preservation of knowledge across generations, and provided a framework of support, accountability, and shared purpose that was utterly essential for mastering such a complex and demanding way of life. The truth is, the samurai's greatest strength was not found in isolation, but in his connection to a centuries-old tradition and the community that upheld it. From the first light of dawn until the final moments of dusk, the samurai's day was a meticulously crafted tapestry of discipline, woven from threads of intense physical exertion, profound mental focus, and unwavering spiritual devotion. We've journeyed through their world, from the silent, purifying shock of misogi, under a frigid waterfall, to the thunderous crack of wooden practice swords in the sparring grounds. We've seen how their training was never just about building a stronger body, but about forging an unbreakable will through the relentless repetition of subari cuts and the grueling endurance of armored runs. Their minds were sharpened not only by studying strategic texts and reconstructing historical battles, but also through the quiet, precise focus of calligraphy and the contemplative ritual of the tea ceremony. Every action, from the way they maintained their sacred katana to the manner in which they served their lord, was an integral part of their practice, a continuous loop of learning, application, and reflection designed to create a human being who was resilient, adaptable, and utterly committed to a path of excellence. This holistic approach to self-mastery, the seamless integration of the physical, the mental, and the spiritual is the samurai's most powerful and enduring legacy. They understood that a sharp sword is useless without a sharper mind to guide it, and that a brilliant strategy is worthless without the resilient spirit to see it through. Their lives stand as a profound testament to the power of daily, disciplined practice, reminding us that true greatness is not born in a single, dramatic moment, but is cultivated in the countless ordinary moments of effort and intention. It was this complete, all-encompassing dedication to their craft that transformed these men from simple soldiers into the legendary icons of focus and honor we remember today. So, what can their ancient routine teach us about our modern lives? While we may not be facing opponents on a battlefield, we all grapple with our own daily challenges, distractions, and goals. The samurai's example invites us to reflect on our own disciplines. Where in your life could you apply more consistent, focused effort? How might you create a more holistic routine that nurtures not just your body, but also your mind and your sense of purpose? Consider starting small, perhaps with a few minutes of morning meditation to clarify your intentions, or by dedicating yourself fully to a single daily task without distraction. Their path shows us that discipline is not a punishment, but the ultimate form of self-respect. If you found this deep dive into the heart of samurai discipline insightful, and you're curious to explore more historical mysteries and the secrets of the past, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss our next